So the next talk will be about IPS-derived different models, and we know that you all are very much into IPS-derived models. And here's Ruchi from the National Eye Institute with all the details what you should do and what you shouldn't do, I guess.
Wow. Well, let's see. Good afternoon. I would like to start by thanking the organizers, Sarah and Florian, to include me in such an elite list of speakers. It's an honor to be here. And I have learned already so much from this meeting. I hope my talk also teaches you a little bit. But so what I will do, I'll talk about the IPS technology and how can you use this tissue for disease modeling. Primarily for this meeting is macular degeneration, but I do have a few slides talking about some IRDs. This is gonna, well, I thought, okay. This is gonna be, this is what we do in the lab. Our lab is very focused on stem cells. We work on iPSCs, which are induced by pluripotent stem cells. And I thought I can use our lab journey and our lab work to tell you how can you use this IPS technology to study different diseases in a dish, and also for potential drug screen. You can also use this tissue for cell-based therapies, which I will not be talking today. So as you can see in the bottom of this schematic, we make different variety of tissues. We make RP monolayer. We recently got into retinal organoids, thanks to our postdoc Andrea Baravino. And we also make cells that are recipe for coronal capillaries, which you heard from Ron Mullins, and we also make cells for macrophages. So this is going to be the outline of my talk. I will show how we've optimized this protocol. Then I will going to use some examples from the lab work that you can to show how you can model disease. I am going to be off track of AMD, but I think I'll give a reason why I'm showing this IRD. And then I'm going to talk about the next two steps, which about the regional heterogeneity and the resources in conclusion. So I think one of the biggest advantages of working with iPSCs is human iPSCs is that you can use this tool to recreate human development in a dish, and I think it's also important to have this tool in place if you want to differentiate, if you want to use any differentiated tissue. So there are multiple ways of recreating a human development in a dish or in a shot, optimizing a protocol. And the best way is to have a reporter line. In our case, we have this reporter line where a GFP is under RP-specific promoter, which is tyrosinase, and RFP is under constitutive promoter, which will always express in your dish. So as you can see in the bottom panel, iPSC cells are expressing red color, and as your cells are differentiating into RP cells, you will start to see green color or yellow color because mix of the red and green. And I think other thing is very important to have this such reporter line is that you can actually quantify the efficiency of your differentiation, which I'll show in the next slide. So before going into the efficiency, how we quantified that or optimize the protocol, this is a timeline. This is a timeline that we use to differentiate iPSC cell into RP cells. Before us, there were several protocols in the field that had used spontaneous differentiation or directed differentiation, plus the work from Kapil's postdoc here, where we use all this knowledge to come up with this timeline. We used different conditions, different concentrations, and then we picked the one that had given us the RP cells with the highest efficiency. So like I said, we were working with the reporter cell line, which in our case, GFP was under tyrosinase. So if you run a flow where you can see, you can actually measure the efficiency of a differentiating cells. So as you see in this scatter plot, the x-axis is propydium iodide, which tells you about the viability of the cells, and the y-axis is expression of your GFP that these cells are expressing. Another advantage of working with RP cells is that you can see these are pigmented, and you can see how homogeneous your cells are in a dish. So by using this tool of a reporter line, we were able to make the immature RP cells, but we wanted to make sure that the protocol that we are developing, it does make a functional mature cell. So at the same time we were working on the coelobethy cells, we found that we had an observation in the cell what we noticed the cells on a transfer while in the immature stage, before they had a fully developed apical processes, we saw this organelle which is marked in by a yellow arrow, primary cilium. It tend to appear before the apical processes, and as most of you might know, this primary cilium is the organelle, which is basically an antenna on the surface of the cell. It actually tells the cells what to do according to the environmental cues. So we thought if we are able to enhance this celiogenesis, it might help us to have the confluent apical processes, plus it might help us to have the mature RP cells. So that's what we did in this paper that we had published in 2018. As you can see, we used two chemicals, FED-choline and PG2. They both are celiogenesis enhancers. And when we treated them, when we used them for the treatment of iPS-RP cells in a culture, in a transfer, we saw these cells had nicer apical processes. These cells had apical located melanosome, and these cells have other functional characteristics that I'll show you in the next slide. So with our celiogenesis enhancing chemicals, we have this schematic or this timeline that you get the functional and mature RP cell in 10 weeks. There is optimizing a protocol is one thing. Making sure that protocol you are developed, be it any kind of protocol, like in this case I'm talking about RP cells, you want to make sure that this protocol is reproducible and robust. So and specifically working with iPSC cells, you want to make sure that no matter which iPSC line you are picking up, that iPSC line is differentiating in your tissue of interest. For our case, we have tested this differentiation from iPSC from different patient donors. We have tested these iPSCs for gene-edited CRISPR-Cas line. We have tested this line for different knockout genes such as CFH, C3, and CFR receptor. And to our good news, there are several labs in the field, in addition to the companies that have been able to reproduce this protocol. So this was a schematic that we had published 2 years ago in STAR protocol. It tells you exactly what to look in a dish while you are trying to make RP cells. It tells you what kind of markers you need to see. That tells you that cells are pure and mature. And then it also tells you that you grow cells in a transfer and how you can make them functional and pure. So you make iPS cells. You optimize your protocol, you have validated your protocol, but you want to make sure that any tissue that you're differentiated from these iPSC cells, they are functional and polarized. Because I think at the end of the day, when you want to use this tissue for any assays in your lab or for any disease modeling, you want to start with the best functional and in vitro derived tissue, which is close to its in vivo counterpart. For RP cells, we know what different characteristics this tissue should have. For example, the top panel shows you the apical processes. You know these are important for this tissue. The bottom panel shows you how hexagonal the cells are. And now with the recent tools that our lab and others have established, you can actually measure the morphometry of these cells. The another important aspect of RP cells is phagocytosis. You know these RP cells, they tend to eat, they have to eat outer segments, and one can actually measure the functionality of this phagocytosis by feeding the pH-sensitive label outer segments to the dish, and then you can run the flow. We use a pH-sensitive diet. Others in the field have used the FITC. It can actually allow you to see if the cells are mature or not. For example, the blue bar is the fully mature RP cell, which has almost double the phagocytic capacity at 4 hours than compared to immature cells. The junctional integrity, as you have heard in Matthew's talk, that there is different barriers, and the outer blood retina barrier is one of the major component of that is RP cells. In a dish, you can actually measure this. Just pass the current from top to the bottom of a transfer, and you can measure the resistance. And this graph shows you the box plot of the gradual increase of junctional integrity of the cells. And you want to make sure that the cells that you are culturing in your dish and you're going to be using for any assay, they have a tight resistance. The other assays that you might be aware of is the different polarization assays. This tissue secretes cytokines in a polarized manner, VEGF in the basal, PEDF in the apical, and also, like I said, there are morphometric analysis that our lab has also published. It's such a reshape that you can actually check the hexagonality cell area of the cells. So in short, the bottom line I want to say, which is that when you have iPS tissue, in our case I was talking about RP cells, you want to make sure that you are validating your tissue for the functional assay that this tissue should perform, like I just showed in the previous slide. In the next section, I will show you two examples. One as a monogenic disease, and the second I'll talk about the macular degeneration. So here I will talk about the coelopathies. Coelopathies is a subcategory of IRD. This is the disease that is caused by the mutation in the primary cilia. One of the shared phenotype of these patients is retinal degeneration. So what we decided to we decided to pick the mutation from that affects primary cilia of different aspects. For example, CEP290, LCA5, and MYO7A, it affects the ciliary trafficking, protein trafficking. BB-SOMs, it affects a BB-SOM complex, and PRPF31, it affects the ciliary. It's a transcription factor that affects the splicing of the ciliary genes. So then, what we did, we thought if we wanted to study the coelogenesis or coelopathies in a broad spectrum way, we will pick all these mutations. We will go to the NEI clinic, thanks to Tiernan and his colleagues. We get the patient blood, we make iPSC cells, and if we make RP cells, it will allow us to study the downstream common pathways that these all patients might have, RP cells in these patients might have. So another thing I want to point out in this slide, when you work with iPS cells and when you make these iPSC cells from patient blood or fibroblasts or any somatic tissue, you want to make sure these cells are well characterized. You want to make sure that they have chromosomal stability. You can do it by karyotyping. You want to make sure that these cells are expressing the potency markers, such as for the pluripotency marker, you can look for the OX4 and the TRA181. One of the things of iPSC cells is that these are the cells that can make any type of the body cell. Hence, you want to make sure that these cells express the cell type that define the three germ layers: ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. And these are the markers that I have listed here. So once you have done all this, you can use these cells for any tissue you want to. So we made RP cells from these iPSCs, and then we wanted to see if these iPS-RP2 cells can help us to discover the downstream mechanism, as I said. So what we did, we wanted to first see if these mutations have cause or defects in primary cilia. Here you see a monolayer of RP cells stained for ARL13B and pericentrin. These are the cilia markers, and you can see the ARL13B stains exoneme, and the pericentrin is the basal body, and you can see the cilia from the patients, ciliopathy patients. They had a very weird and crooked primary cilia, and then we were like, okay, let's see how the iPSC-RP cells are. So we used this marker, sodium potassium ATPase. I think most of you would know this. In a healthy control iPS-RP cells or a native tissue, this marker is expressed on the apical side. And when we checked this marker in other patient cells, we saw that this marker was mislocalized either to the lateral side or basolateral side. So we saw that potential mislocalization of this marker might be indicating to the loss of polarization in these cells. So where are we going with this? I'm not going to talk in detail about all this whole process, but our goal is to have discover some common regulatory pathway genes and then target those via drug screens and overexpression of certain genes or do CRISPR editing and find some mutation agnostic therapy. And I'm going to be doing some shameless plugs here. We will have a talk by our grad student Dominic on September, and he will be discussing in detail about this project. And I think I don't want to tell one thing, that why did I choose to have this IRDs? I think you can learn from one disease and you can translate to other diseases, because the common pathways that make a tissue, a cell dysfunctional, unhealthy, these cells, the RP cells, they have a shared common pathway. So we hope that what we learn from this ciliopathy studies, we might be able to translate to AMD. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the macular degeneration. We have learned, at least I have learned so much today about AMD, but we know there's so much known in the literature. This is, I don't need to even go into these cartoons. You have seen better pictures of patients from different docs by Tianan and Usha. But this is what happens in AMD, the dry AMD. You have sub-RP deposits, and it potentially causes the death of RP cells, or vice versa, or there is a loss of photoreceptors and capillaries. These are different information that we have already know in the field, that RP dysfunction of RP most likely precedes photoreceptor degeneration, that one of the key phenotype of dry AMD is sub-RP deposits, and maybe and through Jiva studies and other studies that other people have done in the field, complement pathway has a role in AMD pathogenesis, and RP could be the primary site of complement pathway in dysregulation. So with all this information that we know in the field, we decided we set up these goals. We wanted to replicate key cellular phenotype in a dish. We thought if we are able to make this disease in a dish, then we will be able to, it will allow us to study the cellular phenotype to AMD risk allele. And I think the advantage of working with human cells is that because you have access to patient cells, and you can actually make the patient iPSCs carrying risk alleles, and you can study in a dish. And if you have a nice assay set up, you can actually use these assays to do a phenotypic drug screen. So this you have heard already in the morning session. It's a multifactorial disease. Environmental factors have an effect. Genetic factors also contribute. And the complement pathway is dysregulated in macular degeneration. The genetic aspect of this AMD, we know that the genes involved in the complement pathway, such as CFH, causes the increased pathogenesis to the disease. So we chose to work on this complement pathway, CFH. We got the patient lines and we worked on it, and I'll show you that data later. The other thing we focused in this study in this disease modeling for macular degeneration, we chose to work on anaphylactoxin arm of complement pathway, because we all know no matter what happens on the three different pathways of complement, these C3A and C5A are the these are the major factors that actually causes the dysfunction of a tissue. So before us, there were a couple of papers that people have shown. If you stress this primary RP tissue with the human serum or complement activated human serum, it does induce AMD-like phenotypes. So as I said, when you do that for AMD, the disease phenotype or one of the key phenotype is sub-RP deposits. And if you want to do the disease modeling in a dish, you want to make sure the tissue that your model is replicating at least some of those phenotypes. In here, what you see is ApoE. ApoE is one of the sub-RP deposits marker. You see when we treat this cell with CCHS, this ApoE is shown marked by white arrow and colored in red. It is between RP and transfer, and transfer pores are also clogged with this ApoE protein. And you also heard about the neutral lipids and how these are part of sub-RP deposits. So we stain these we use Nile red on BodyBite to stain these neutral lipids. You can see the cross-section view showing your lipid deposits inside, shown by a blue arrow, or beneath the RP by the white arrow. You can in the top panel you see the Philippine stain. It marks the free cholesterol accumulated in the cells, and the bottom is showing the enhanced view of the body pie. So the slide, what I'm trying to show is that we characterize this model in a dish. We wanted to make sure at least this model is showing some of the marker that we know it's present in AMD patients. The other thing is important and it's very critical to do. Make sure that you are validating your model or the phenotype that you are seeing in your dish in more than multiple ways. So here, what we did, we used the H&E histology, hematoxylin and eosin, and you see the black arrow shows the accumulation between the transcell membrane and the RP cells. You also see how the RP cells is breaking apart. The bottom panel is the transmission electron microscopy, showing you the same deposit that I showed in the previous slide, and they marked by the blue and the white arrows. And you also see how the transcell port is also getting clogged with these deposits. The bottom panel is the scanning electron microscopy of the transcell membrane. Here we have ripped off the cells, and this is the scanning electron microscopy of the transcell membrane, just marking the deposit that we see after CCH's treatment. So, like I said, when you work with an iPS tissue or human iPS tissue, you have access to the human genetics, and you can actually replicate that human genetics in a dish. So, what we were lucky enough for, we had AMD patient iPS lines carrying either CFH risk allele, HH, or CFH wild type allele, YY. So what we did the same thing. We measured the ApoE deposits or the Nile red positive lipid deposits, and to our surprise, what we noticed at the baseline level, which is CIHS, the cells carrying risk allele had a higher or twofold higher levels of lipid deposits and ApoE deposits. And when you treat these cells with the complement competent human serum, we saw these genotype, they responded similarly. So at least what I'm trying to say here is that the patient-specific iPS cells allowed us to replicate this information that we know in the JIVA studies. And I think, as you heard in Bob Mullen's talk and several others, is that AMD is not an RP disease. It doesn't affect in silo. There are other tissue that gets affected. And when it comes to complement pathway, we know it's just not the RP tissue that gets affected. We also know the choroid has a major role. And who knows, now it's going to be in a retina also has a major role in causing AMD pathogenesis. So what we are doing next to understand better which tissue or which cell type has a major role in causing the AMD pathogenesis for CFH. We are working, we are bioprinting isogenic tissue where we have iPSC cells, where we have RP cells derived from iPSC cells, where we have endothelial cells and pericytes and fibroblasts, which are going to make the choroid capillaries. We have CFH knockout line. So if you make different combination, you can actually know how, you can actually study which cell type has a more of a role in AMD pathogenesis. And you can hear more about this from Andrea Barabino's poster on Tuesday. And thanks to Bright Focus Foundation for giving a travel grant for him to presenting his work. Okay, so then where are we going next with this understanding of genotype in AMD pathogenesis? Recently, NEI started this AMD Integrative Biology Initiative. It's a collection of 75 iPSC lines from ERS to cohort, and these patients are carrying mutation SNPs in chromosome 1 or chromosome 10, and NEI made these iPSC lines in collaboration with NICEF Foundation. So I think not only us, but several in the community are using these iPS cells to understand the role of this genotype. And what we are choosing to do, we want to understand if these tools that the model that we have developed in the lab and these iPS tools that we have, can it help us to understand more about this, the role of these role of these risk allele in these two chromosomes. And we will have a poster in this meeting on Tuesday about this. In the last two points, I will cover how we recreated the human cellular regional heterogeneity in a dish, and also the funded work that we got from the Bright Focus Foundation. So Paul, I'll start in a reverse order. So this we recently were very fortunate and lucky to get this the funding from Bright Focus Foundation to understand the understand genetics and ethnicity contribution in AMD pathogenesis. As you heard in the morning talks, that the different specific population are either susceptible or resistant to having AMD pathogenesis. For example, Caucasians tend to have more AMD risk alleles, then followed by Asians, and then followed by African population. So we got these IPS lines from NICES. These are SNP genotype for their genetics. We differentiated them, and then we hope that this tool will allow us to understand better what are the factors that makes one population susceptible or resistant. And we are also collaborating on this project with Rui Chen, with his single cell RNA sequencing, all the whole pipeline that he has built. It will help us to understand the genetic variants that these populations might have specific to their ethnicity. So, oh yes, another shameless plug. We have a poster on this, and Jivon going to be presenting on this. This is our ongoing work, and this is about recreating human regional RP diversity in a dish using iPSC. You heard about that RP, human RP map has different population. You also heard from Rishan that they are different. These population might be have a different genotype. So we. This all started for us with the following observations, the knowledge that we know that there are specific photoreceptors in human retina. There are the cones and there are the rods, and they have different structure. So we also know in 2016, a paper published by Bhatia et al. Is that if you image RP flat mount from specific areas, these cells differ in their size. We know this paper showed us that the macular cells have a smaller area, and the peripheral cells have a bigger area. What we didn't know until this in 2016 or until we published the paper is that. Is it true for the whole RP flat mount, or does there are more RP population on a human adult RP map based on the size? So if you want to work with 1 million of RP cells and you want to segment their size, you want to have something reliable or AI based, so that you are actually quantifying each and every cell on your human RP flat mount. So we established this AI-based algorithm. It is called Reshape. Two of the postdocs in the lab did that, and what it allowed us to measure every single cell, as I had mentioned, on a flat mount. So basically, you can stain them with the border marker, and then it will tell you how big the cells are, how small the cell are, how hexagonal the cell are, how elongated the cell are. For example, in this box plot here, it tells you the hexagonality, which means how hexagon the cells are. It's very comparable for 2 AMD donors as compared to the primary RP cells. So then we use this Reshape to make a RP map, and this whole RP flat mount is a heat map showing you the differences in the area. So here, the darker color tells you the cells are smaller, and the yellow or the orange color tells you the cells are bigger. So when we divided this map, what we found is that there were 5 different RP populations on human RP flat mount, which were different in their cell size. So if I have to tell you how far these populations were from the optic nerve, the schematic top tells you the distance of these populations from the optic nerve. ON is optic nerve, and the bottom panel is the enlarged views of the heat maps of the area. Like I said, dark color tells you the cells are smaller, and the bigger the orange or the yellow color tells you cells are bigger. And this is the box map of these cell area that the Reshape quantified. So as you can see, the P1 is the smallest population, P2 goes up, then P3, and then P4 is another smallest population, and P5 close to ora serrata is the biggest population. So now we have a reference map of these RP cells, and what we did with this map that Davide had made with that he has developed, and thanks to Larissa from NEI, they actually were able to analyze the ultra fundus photographs from the patients, and it actually allowed us to see in which disease condition, which of the RP population is getting affected. For example, if you see the top panel, top row, choroideremia, we see the degeneration in P3 for the late onset retinal degeneration, which is caused by the mutation in CTRP5. We see P2 and P3 gets degenerated, and in another patient with retinal degeneration, we saw another, again, P3 and P4. Stargardt and AMD, no surprise to us, is a maculopathy disease. So we saw P1 was affected, but we also saw in AMD, P4 and P5 was getting affected. So it led us to think there must be some molecular and functional differences between these RP population that dictate these differential sensitivity in different diseases. So we were like, what if we are able to make this population in a dish? It will allow us to study the disease better, and also it will help us to have a disease-specific treatments. So then we went back to our schematic again. We decided to do a drug screen, and we thought if we can target this committed RP fit, where cells, the differentiating cells also already know that they're going to be RP cells, but they don't know yet if they're going to be making finger-like apical processes or petal-like processes. So we were like, if we can modulate this, maybe we will be able to make the regional-specific RP cells. So this was our execution plan. We had 115 drug screen, and we differentiated, these belong to different pathways. And again, we use our reporter line strategy. What we did, we got this GFP DAC01 line. You all know 01 marks the border, and we use this for the drug screen to see which drugs gonna affect the size of RP cells. And then we, of course, use our reshape, which actually allows the segmentation of these RP cells. So it allowed us, so this reporter cell line and this drug screen, it allows us to give two drugs that change the cell size of these iPSC RP cells. One was closer to P1, another was the other was very similar to P3. It's the one thing for cells to have the smaller or bigger size. The other thing for cells to have those structure that it makes them for macular or peripheral RP cells. So we looked for the apical processes. Macular RP cells had a petal-like apical processes, and the peripheral cells have a finger-like apical processes. These cells population were also very molecularly distinct that we discovered by doing single-cell RNA-seq. You see macular iPSRP, which is blue, they cluster together, and then the green, which is peripheral RP cells, they cluster together. So in the last slide, 2 slides, I think what I'm going to show, I'm going to share the knowledge that that's available in the field and the experience that we have gained so far working for the last 12, 13 years in the lab for things to consider while you work with the iPS cells. I think the important question which will decide how many IPS lines will be used. It depends what is the question you are asking. Like in the morning, we have seen not every, there are pros and cons with every, with all the models, and specifically when you work with iPSC cells, you want to make sure that you are covering all all the variabilities these iPSC cells bring because of the genetics and the technical reasons. So, for example, you want to protocol development, one is okay, you can make your cells, but I think if you want to validate the cells, you need more than one line. You're doing the disease mechanism or disease modeling, it depends. If you're doing the IRDs, then I think you can, one line and the 2 clones are okay, and if you're doing the polygenic disease such as macular degeneration, you want to have minimum 3 lines in that. When it comes to the control and control lines, which would act as a control for your disease lines, for AMD, the patient-matched sibling family controls also work for IRDs or studying the effect of certain one gene. I think the CRISPR-edited isogenic controls are the best. And there is a new concept, which is a reference line, which actually is a line that has been used across multiple labs, and those lines are well genotyped and well characterized in terms of their genetic, their genes and all. I think this is also a good concept that's coming up in the field that you can use as a control in your experiments. Again, repeating the same thing, it's a must thing to do. You want to make sure that your iPSCs that you're making are characterized, they are stable, they have a stable genome, the prevalence marker, and iPSC cells are very susceptible to mycoplasma. So make sure that that if you're using iPSC cells, you are testing it every other week so that you are avoiding all this contamination. Any tissue you are differentiating, it's important to validate those. In our case, I just showed you the RP cells, so make sure that you are validating this tissue. There was a comment in the afternoon session that iPSC cells could be too young, but I think it all depends what protocols you are using and if you are culturing appropriately and validating your tissue so that you're avoiding those flaws that might bring to your assays. And like I said, the potential source of variabilities in iPSC culture are because of donor genetics and technical issues, operator issues, clonal issues, reagents issues, but I think you can all, I'm happy to discuss more, we can all work around these. These are the resources that are available in the field. One of the important the main society that works is ICCR. It has a big guideline document that actually tells you what to do, what not to do when you work with iPSCs. Different cell banks have well-characterized iPSC lines. Like I said, if you want to work in AMD field, NEI, AMD, IBI has a wonderful resource that you can actually use the iPSCs. And there's a European bank for iPSCs also, which controls cells and reference lines and the genetically diverse line. With that, I would like to acknowledge the lab people. It's a blessing to have a lab or a group which you can actually call your family. So I'm very grateful in that, and I'm very grateful for all the support that I have, that Kapil has been giving me all these years. And last but not least, there are going to be 2 more posters that I didn't talk, but they're going to be talking on lactylation and talking about the digital twin of RP by Davide. I think I rushed it, but I hope I hope I made some points about iPSC technology. Thank you.
Hands coming up everywhere.
Thank you so much. It's such a great talk and educational to me. So I always have a question regarding to the translational aspect for your drug screening or any screening outcome. Let's say if you have a small molecule agent you get out from your iPSC-derived RPE, what's your next step? Like in our normal consideration, we'll try it in animal model. So for this human organoid, what is the next step?
See, you're asking me that, so correct me if I understand your question. You're asking me, you find a drug during your disease modeling using simple, like 2D models for one tissue, and you're asking me, should you be doing for the complex models or you go for the animal models?
Yeah, so for more specifically like the pharmacokinetics, all the concerns and safety.
Well, I think the pharmacokinetics, I think you can also do in vitro models also. You can look for the ECs and IC value of your drugs that we also do in the lab. And in terms of the safety profile of the drug, I think animal models should be used. I think they will tell you actually, if actually is you can see that's the drug that you're using is changing or correcting the phenotype in a dish, but you want to make sure that the drug is going to be safe enough. So I think you should be doing animal testing for that drug. And if you want to use complex models, then I think I would suggest do a simple models like 2D models, RP or something, and then go to the complex model on your picked drug targets that you want to do. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Joe Hollyfield. The different stages in the maturation of the RPE, how stable are those different stages? If you dissociated any one of those stages and forced them to divide, do they go back to the beginning and then, or do they start after division at the stage that they were in when you dissociated them?
So, are you asking about the different populations that we recreated in a dish, or are you asking about the cells you make in a dish, how stable they are at the end?
I was talking about the 4 stages of differentiation, 4 or 5 stages.
Okay, yeah,
of
I
differentiation
see what.
that you
So,
described.
yes, so I could have spent a little more time there, but I think those 4 different stages of the differentiation is the different stages that a cell goes to reach a mature RP state. So if you're going to be stopping those cells at this stage, you will not get mature RP cells. These cells will lose because at this stage. So there was a state, the schematic I showed. There was a one stage that I call committed RP fate. So if you are able to reach until then you have cells that will, no matter what, they will stay RP cells. They will be just immature. They won't revert back to iPSC. But if you're gonna stop before, then forget it. Then you will not. So I think so the point is you want to make sure that if you want functional mature RP cells, you do the whole process and then you do the analysis later.
Hossein Amiri, University of Southern California. Thanks for the interesting talk. Do you have any hypotheses as to why the RP cells in P4 are small, similar to fovea? The part of retina that is not even involved much in, vision processing.
Yeah, and I'm gonna. So this question, yes, and I think when we were doing this study, we thought that we didn't know what to expect, to be honest, with the first place when we were doing it. But when we did this study, we saw before, we thought that there is that it might correlate with the ring of cones in periphery that retina had, but it didn't. And I don't know. I don't think we know why this subpopulation is still there. But we do have a first author of this study, Davide, and we have Kapil also. If I'm missing something, they can add. But to your question, I don't think we know why those populations are there.
Ruchi, thank you. Beautiful talk, and congratulations to you and the whole lab for doing all of this. My question is more about the molecular heterogeneity that you see in the RP, and I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about the transcriptional differences between the clusters, and if you have any hypothesis or speculation of how this relates to diseases. I'm Laura Campello from Avista Therapeutics.
Yeah, so the one of the things that we, when we got this data and we did bulk RNA-seq, a single cell RNA-seq on this P1 and P3 population that we made, we saw that these cells were molecularly different with the same number that had been reported earlier in the literature, which was 5 to 6%. Or 4 to 5%, but in terms of finding the marker that you asking me that could define these regional heterogeneities, we are still working on it. We are actually working with Rui Chen too, finding the marker that he had mentioned in his talk to compare to see if those populations that we are making do they also express those markers. The other question, if you're saying the disease in terms of disease modeling, right? So yes, so we have. I didn't show the data here. We have a prelim data. We are still collecting the data. But what we did, we used P1 and P3 populations for macular degeneration modeling. The same thing I showed. CCHS, see how they affect. We see the differences. We saw the P1 and P3 differences. We also are what we're also doing. We're also picking the retinal degeneration, like I showed you in one of the slides, affect the periphery, for example, the choroidemia or the LOD, and we made RP cells of these two, P1 and P3. We are doing the testing that we know, and we want to see do they actually behave. So we do have prelim data. It's very convincing, but I think if you want to show, I'm happy to show you later.
Thank you very much. That's an amazing presentation and such a lot of hard work. So my question is, you refer to the topographical distribution of these different RP cell types in terms of their phenotype, and then Rui talked about the the genetic expression or the gene expressions in these cells. So I think you touched on it to say that you're looking at these correlations. My question to you is, do they recapitulate that when you start putting them into your organoids or your culture systems? Do you continue to see the same kind of phenotypic patterns?
So you're asking me these P1, P3 cells that we made in a dish, do they stay stable?
Yes, are they stable,
Yes,
and
yeah.
they continue to remain stable?
Yeah. Yes. So I think the stability question came like multiple times. So I think, so again, I'll just make the one point. I think once you have the system in place that you have validated multiple times, and you know that you are putting the right growth factors and right reagents to make a mature population, as long as you're giving the cell the right media, the right condition, they're going to stay stable. Because these cells going to be what you're going to give them. So if you have optimized protocol and you have spent enough time and you know these are the conditions these cells need to be stable, so they will. If you're going to modify, then they...
And my subsequent question is, are there functional differences?
In P1, P3, we got to get this paper out. Yeah. There are functional differences. So, well, let me tell you this way. In terms of functionality of RP, like, do they phagocytize? Yes, they do. In terms of the functional specificity of terms of internally that what is dictating these cells to be what they want to be, for example, metabolism. And I know there are a lot of experts in the audience for metabolism, so I'll keep my answer pretty straight. So I think we know that the cones and the rods have a different metabolism. And I think the hypothesis is that whatever cell is talking to cone or the root on the RP side, they technically should be metabolically different because they are facing different needs. So we see those differences in the culture. We also see differences of channels. These channels, calcium channels and potassium channels, the channels that define the physiology of a tissue. So we do see these differences. I think one of the bottlenecks that comes for us doing such studies in a dish, they're not much known in case of RP. So I think for us, it's just like a loop that we find something, then we go back to human tissue and see if it's there, or whatever is known in the field, then we see. So I think we are working in a very constructed like knowledge that is available in the field, but we want to make sure that what we see in the dish, we confirm with the human tissue.
Maybe one short last question, a short last answer.
That was okay. I thought I should make it clear, but anyways.
Ruchi, great work and great talk. I was looking at your different cell type populations being affected specifically in certain diseases. In some of them, at least, in later stage disease, it can spread all across the retina.
Yeah.
So I was wondering how this model or this modeling works in that situations.
Yeah, I think. So I think, look, I think that table we did, so the number of patients was very less there. I think I didn't show you the progression of a disease. I showed you a snapshot of a disease that we got the fundus images for the patient, right? So I think the least thing that studies told us that different regions are affected, so P2 and P3, right? So we are making P1 and P3, and at least we have the right set of cells now that will model the disease better than what if we had only P1 cells. So I think we have a better model to study. And if you want to know what if there are other regions are affected, then I think we need to have more patients and more of a time course study.
Thank you.
I talk less, see?
No, you can do it. You can do it.
Sorry, thank you.